The thing you have to understand about Ohio, about this specific patch of the Midwest, is the silence. It's not an empty silence, not a void. It's a heavy, breathing thing, especially when the sun starts to bleed out over the endless fields of corn. I've lived on this farm my entire life. I learned to drive on the dirt tracks that snake between these fields. I had my first kiss in the barn that's now sagging with age. And I buried my grandfather in the small family plot at the edge of the North 40. This land is in my blood and bones, as much a part of me as my own heartbeat. And lately, that heartbeat has been getting louder, thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a desperate drum trying to warn me of something I should have seen coming. My days have a certain rhythm to them, a cadence built from decades of repetition. I wake with the sun, the light cutting through the old, single-pane windows of the farmhouse my grandfather built. The coffee percolates with a gurgle that is the first human sound of the day. I then pull on my work boots, their leather worn soft and comfortable, and step out onto the porch. That first look is always the same, a sea of green and gold, cornstalks standing at attention in rows so straight they could have been drawn with a ruler. The air smells of damp earth, fertilizer, and the faint, sweet promise of the harvest to come. I took over the farm fully after Grandpa passed 2 years ago. It was never a question. The city life my few high school friends escaped to always felt claustrophobic to me. I preferred the open sky, the tangible result of a day's hard work, the profound quiet of a night so dark you can see the Milky Way as a shimmering dust trail across the velvet black. It's a simple life, a hard life, but it's an honest one. I grow corn, I tend to a small vegetable garden for myself, and I make just enough to keep the bank from getting too nervous. From my porch, I have a clear view of the entire south field, and in the very center of that field, about 500 yards out, stands the old scarecrow. It's been there since I was a boy. Grandpa and I built it one autumn afternoon, a fun project to keep a restless kid busy. We stuffed a pair of his old overalls and a flannel shirt with straw, jammed a burlap sack head onto a wooden post, and drew a lopsided smile with a marker. We named him Old Jed, a little joke between us. For 20-some years, Old Jed has stood his silent vigil. His clothes have faded from sun and rain, the burlap face has grown stained and moldy in spots, and one of his straw-stuffed arms has come partially loose, dangling limply. He's a fixture, a landmark. I barely even registered him most days. He was just part of the scenery, as constant and unremarkable as the old oak tree by the driveway. I'd glance at him, a subconscious check to make sure he was still standing, and then get on with my day. It was a comforting sort of permanence. Lately, though, that rhythm has felt off. It started subtly, a feeling more than anything concrete. You know that feeling when you're driving down a long, empty highway at night, your headlights cutting a lonely path through the darkness, and you pass those vast, black fields of corn. You get this prickling on the back of your neck, this undeniable, primal sensation that you're being watched from that impenetrable wall of stalks. You tell yourself it's just nerves, but a part of you, the ancient part that remembers being prey, knows better. I'd been feeling that, but here, on my own land, in the broad daylight. It was the sound, initially. The sound of the corn. Anyone who's lived around it knows its language. It whispers in a gentle breeze, it rustles and clacks when it's dry, it shushes and sways in a strong wind. But last week, there was no wind. The afternoon was utterly still, the air thick and humid. Yet, from the south field, I heard it a loud, persistent rustling. Not the gentle whisper of a calm day, but the aggressive, slapping sound of stalks being pushed aside. A sound that usually means a deer or a couple of raccoons are moving through. I stopped what I was doing, my hand pausing on the tractor's engine block I was cleaning, and I stared out at the field. The rustling stopped the instant my eyes focused on the green wall. Nothing moved. The corn was as still as a painting. I shook my head, putting it down to a trick of the heat or an animal that had frozen when it sensed my attention. But the feeling lingered, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. It was the first note of a dissonant chord that was about to shatter the symphony of my life. I tried to shrug it off. I finished my work, went inside, and ate a solitary dinner. But as I washed the dishes, looking out the window over the sink, my eyes were drawn irresistibly to the south field. The sun was setting, casting long, distorted shadows from the cornstalks. And there, in the center, was Old Jed. His silhouette was stark against the orange sky. I stared at him for a long time, until the last light faded and he disappeared into the gathering gloom. For a moment, just before the darkness swallowed him whole, I could have sworn his burlap head was turned, no longer looking out over the field, but directly at the house, directly at me. I went to bed uneasy that night. The house, usually a sanctuary of familiar creaks and sighs, felt different. It felt like it was holding its breath. I lay in the dark, listening, and from far, far away, carried on a whine that I couldn't feel on my skin. I heard it again, the dry, shuffling rustle of corn, moving with a purpose that was not its own. I pulled the covers tighter, a grown man acting like a frightened child, and told myself it was just the night insects. But I knew, deep down in that primal place, that it wasn't. Something was wrong with the corn. Something was wrong with old Jed. The next morning, I emerged from the house feeling foolish. The bright, honest sun had a way of burning away the nightmares of the dark. The air was fresh, the sky was a clear, brilliant blue, and the world seemed right again. I sipped my coffee on the porch, deliberately scanning the south field, ready to laugh at my own paranoia. Old Jed was right where he was supposed to be, a lonely, ragged sentinel in the middle of the vast green sea. See, I told myself, everything is fine. You're just lonely, letting your imagination get the better of you. I spent the morning repairing a section of fencing on the western edge of the property. It was hard, physical work that left my muscles burning and my mind pleasantly blank. There was no room for spooky thoughts when you were wrestling with a roll of barbed wire and a stubborn post. By lunchtime, I was sweating and covered in a fine layer of dust. I walked back towards the house, the gravel of the driveway crunching loudly under my boots, a satisfyingly normal sound. I decided to eat my sandwich on the porch, enjoying the slight breeze that had picked up. As I sat down on the top step, my gaze automatically drifted back to the south field. I took a big bite of my ham and cheese, chewing contentedly. And then I stopped. The sandwich turned to sawdust in my mouth. Something was off. It was a subtle thing, a feeling of wrongness that took a moment to register. I squinted, shielding my eyes from the sun with my hand. Old Jed was there, but he looked different, taller. No, closer. A cold dread, entirely separate from the day's heat, began to creep up my spine. I stood up, the forgotten sandwich falling from my hand onto the wooden planks of the porch. I tried to measure the distance with my eyes, using the old oak tree as a fixed point. It was impossible to be sure. Distances in a field like that can be deceptive, tricks of light and perspective. But the more I stared, the more certain I became. The scarecrow was no longer in the dead center of the field. It was noticeably closer to the house. Don't be ridiculous, I muttered aloud, the sound of my own voice startling in the quiet. It's a scarecrow. It's stuck on a post. I forced myself to turn away, to go back inside and get a glass of water. My hand trembled slightly as I held the glass under the tap. This was insanity. Scarecrows don't move. I was letting the isolation and the silence get to me. I had to get a grip. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was a vicious, fast-growing thing. For the rest of the afternoon, I found my eyes constantly flicking towards the south field. Every time I looked, old Jed was just standing there, motionless. Yet, that initial impression of his advanced position refused to leave me. It was like a splinter in my mind. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the ground was soft, and the post had shifted. Maybe a kid had played a prank. But I hadn't seen another soul in days. As evening approached, the feeling of unease returned with a vengeance. I stood at the window, watching the shadows lengthen. I needed proof. I needed to know if I was going crazy or not. I grabbed a can of spray paint from the barn, a bright, fluorescent orange used for marking lumber. My plan was simple, if a little unhinged. I marched out to the edge of the field, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't look directly at old Jed. I kept him in my periphery, afraid of what I might see if I stared too long. I found a sturdy corn stalk about 10 yards into the field, right in the direct line of sight between the porch and the scarecrow. I gave it a thick, unmistakable blast of orange paint about halfway up its height. Then, without looking back, I hurried to the house. I stood on the porch and looked out. The orange mark was a glaring beacon, and old Jed was standing in a direct, straight line from that mark. I burned the image into my memory. The scarecrow, the painted stalk, the relative distances. There, now I would know for sure. I slept fitfully that night, my dreams haunted by a lopsided burlap smile and the sound of shuffling, dragging footsteps through dry husks. I woke up before dawn, a nervous energy coursing through me. The moment the first hint of gray light touched the horizon, I was out of bed and pulling on my jeans. I didn't even make coffee. I went straight to the porch, my breath catching in my throat. The world was still cast in monochrome, the colors not yet returned. I looked towards the south field. My eyes found the fluorescent orange mark first. It was still there, a bright shock against the dull green. And then my eyes traveled past it, along the invisible line to where old Jed should have been. My blood ran cold. The scarecrow was there, but he was no longer behind the mark. He was in front of it. He had moved. He was a good 10, maybe 15 yards closer to the house. He was standing perfectly still, his back to me, but I knew, with a certainty that froze the very marrow in my bones, that he had spent the night advancing towards me while I slept. Panic is a cold fire. It starts in your gut, a flicker of pure, undiluted fear, and then it spreads, icing your veins, seizing your lungs, turning your thoughts into a scrambled, screaming mess. That's what I felt standing on my porch in the pre-dawn light. This wasn't my imagination. This wasn't a trick of the light. The thing in the field was moving. It was real. My first instinct was to run. To get in my truck, drive to town, and never look back. But a deeper, more stubborn instinct took hold, the instinct of a man defending his home. This was my land, my grandfather's land. I wasn't going to be driven off by a thing. A puppet made of straw and old clothes. There had to be a logical explanation. There had to be a way to stop it. I spent the entire day in a state of heightened, frantic alertness. I brought my grandfather's old hunting rifle out onto the porch and leaned it against the wall. I didn't know if a bullet would do anything to a sack of straw, but the solid, cold weight of the metal was a comfort. I did my chores, but my attention was never far from the south field. I developed a new routine. I would work for a minute, then my head would snap up, my eyes locking onto the scarecrow. I'd stare, unblinking, for 30 seconds, a minute, confirming its position, assuring myself it hadn't moved. Then I'd look away, work for another minute, and snap my gaze back. It was during this grim vigil that I noticed the second rule of its terrible game. It only moved when I wasn't looking, not just when I wasn't on the porch, but when my eyes were truly averted. The first time I confirmed it, my stomach dropped. I stared at it for a full 5 minutes, not even blinking until my eyes watered and burned. It remained utterly, completely inert. A frayed piece of straw on its dangling arm twitched in the breeze, but the figure itself was as still as stone. Exhausted, I glanced down to rub my aching eyes. It was a split second, no more. When I looked back up, something was different. It was infinitesimal. Its stance seemed shifted. One of its crude, straw-stuffed boots seemed to be placed slightly forward. It was closer, maybe only by a foot, but it was closer. A sob of frustration and terror caught in my throat. This was it. This was the hellish game. It was exploiting the most basic human necessity, the need to blink, to look away, to rest. I was its prisoner, and my own attention was the jailer I had to employ to keep it at bay. The vast, open landscape of my farm, once a source of pride and freedom, had become a gilded cage. Every corner of my property now felt exposed, every window a potential eye through which the thing could watch me. The psychological toll was immense. My neck and shoulders were permanently tense from the constant, jerking movements. My eyes felt gritty and raw. Every shadow in my peripheral vision became the advancing scarecrow. The rustling of the corn, once a soothing sound, was now a constant auditory torture, a reminder that it was out there, waiting for its moment. I started talking to myself, just to hear a voice. "It's just straw and cloth," I'd whisper, my voice hoarse. "It can't hurt you." But I didn't believe it anymore. That evening, I gathered every clock in the house and turned them to face the wall. I closed the curtains on all the windows except the one facing the south field. I needed to focus. I sat at the kitchen table with a direct line of sight to the monstrosity, a cold cup of coffee in front of me. The night deepened. I refused to sleep. I would outlast it. I would stare it down until the sun rose. My plan was simple, brutal, and born of sheer desperation. I would not look away. 4 hours, I sat there. The moon rose, casting a sickly silver glow over the field. Old Jed was a black cutout against the shimmering corn. My eyes felt like they were being scoured with sand. I pinched the skin on my arms. I slapped my own face. I sang old songs under my breath, anything to stay awake, to stay focused. The scarecrow didn't move a millimeter. It was a test of wills, and I was determined to win. This was my home. But the human body has its limits. Around 4 a.m., a wave of exhaustion so profound washed over me that my head nodded forward. It was just for a second, a micro-sleep. My chin hit my chest, and my eyes, heavy as stones, closed. I snapped them open immediately, a jolt of adrenaline screaming through my system. My heart stopped. The space where the scarecrow had been was empty. My eyes darted frantically across the moonlit field. Where was it? Then I saw it. It was now. At the very edge of the field, its burlap face just visible beyond the first row of corn stalks. It was standing at the property line, no more than 50 yards from my porch. In the space of a single, treacherous blink, it had covered nearly 100 yards. It was close enough now that I could see the dark, empty pits of its eyes, and it was staring right at me. The sight of it at the edge of the field broke something inside me. The careful, watchful strategy was a failure. It was learning, adapting, growing bolder. Waiting and watching was no longer an option. If I couldn't imprison it with my gaze, I would have to destroy it. The thought was a flare of desperate, cleansing fury. Fire. It was made of straw and old, dry cloth. Fire would consume it, reduce it to ash, and end this nightmare. The decision brought a grim sense of purpose. The fear was still there, a constant, cold companion, but it was now overshadowed by a burning need for action. I waited for the sun to rise, my body trembling with a mixture of exhaustion and rage. As soon as there was enough light, I stormed out to the barn, my boots kicking up gravel. I ignored the south field. I didn't want to look at it. I didn't want to give it the satisfaction of my fear. In the barn, I found what I needed. A 5-gallon jerry can of gasoline we used for the tractor. It was half full, sloshing heavily as I hefted it. It would be more than enough. I also grabbed a bundle of rags and an old, long-handled pitchfork. My plan was straightforward. I would douse the thing in fuel, shove the rag into its burlap head, light it, and watch it burn. If it tried to move, the pitchfork would keep it at a distance until the flames took hold. Armed and feeling a savage kind of empowerment, I marched towards the south field. The scarecrow was still there, at the very edge, its body turned towards the house. The morning was dead calm, and the only sound was the frantic beating of my own heart and the slosh of gasoline in the can. As I got closer, a wave of revulsion washed over me. It smelled, not just of damp earth and decay, but of something else, something metallic and foul, like old blood and spoiled meat. Flies buzzed lazily around its straw-stuffed form. I stopped about 20 feet away, my grip tightening on the pitchfork. I expected it to move, to lunge at me, but it remained perfectly still, a mockery of an inanimate object. Its burlap face, with its drawn-on smile, seemed to be sneering at me. "This is for you, you son of a bitch," I growled, my voice cracking. I unscrewed the cap of the jerry can and, with a grunt, hurled the contents forward. The clear liquid arced through the air, splashing over the scarecrow's chest, its shoulders, its grotesque head. The smell of gasoline overpowered the other stench, a sharp, chemical promise of oblivion. I dropped the empty can and fumbled in my pocket for my Zippo lighter. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely strike the flint wheel. It sparked, then caught. The small, steady flame was a beacon of hope. I touched the flame to the rag wrapped around the pitchfork tines. It caught immediately, burning with a hungry yellow light. I took a step forward, aiming the fiery brand at the gasoline-soaked chest of the scarecrow. This was it. The end. And then I blinked. It wasn't a long blink, just the reflexive closing of my eyes against the anticipated blast of heat. But it was enough. When my eyes opened, the scarecrow was gone. The pitchfork, with its burning rag, was thrust into empty air. I stumbled forward, confused and disoriented. Where did it go? I spun around, my heart in my throat. The field was empty. The yard was empty. A dry, rustling sound came from behind me. From the direction of the house, I turned slowly, a dread colder than any I had ever felt seeping into my soul. The scarecrow was not in the field. It was standing on my porch. It was leaning against the front door of my house, its burlap head tilted, its stained, smiling face looking directly at me. It was postured casually, as if it had just been waiting for me to come out, and it was completely dry. There was not a single drop of gasoline on it. The jerry can I had thrown was lying on its side, empty, in the grass where the thing had been standing moments before. A high, thin sound of pure terror escaped my lips. It had never been in the field, or it had, and it had moved in the instant my eyes were closed. It had moved faster than I could possibly comprehend. My attack, my purge, had been a meaningless pantomime. It had played me. It had let me think I had the upper hand, only to show me how utterly powerless I truly was. I dropped the burning pitchfork into the damp grass, where it sizzled and died. There was no fight left in me, only the primal, overwhelming urge to flee. I turned and ran, not towards the house, but towards the woods at the back of the property. The image of that thing lounging on my porch, claiming my home, burned permanently into my mind. I hid in the woods for hours, crouched between the roots of a large sycamore tree. The cool, dappled shade offered no comfort. Every snap of a twig, every call of a bird, sent jolts of terror through me. I was an animal, hunted and cornered. My mind replayed the scene on the porch over and over, the casual, almost arrogant lean of the thing, the way it had simply vanished from the field and reappeared at my door. It was toying with me. As the afternoon wore on, a desperate thirst and a shred of reason finally drove me from my hiding spot. I couldn't stay in the woods forever. I needed to get to my truck. I needed to get to town. The plan was clear now. Gather my wallet, my keys, and get the hell off the farm. Let the bank have it. Let the corn reclaim it. I didn't care anymore. Survival was the only thing that mattered. I approached the house from the rear, moving with the cautious, silent steps of a thief on my own property. The back door was unlocked. I slipped inside, the familiar kitchen feeling alien and violated. The house was silent, but it was a different silence than before. It was a waiting silence. I crept to the front window and peered through a crack in the curtains. The porch was empty. The scarecrow was gone. A part of me hoped, prayed, that my attempted burning had driven it away, that it had returned to its field. I let out a shaky breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Maybe it was over. I needed to get my things and go. I went to the small laundry room off the kitchen to grab a clean shirt from the dryer. I had done a load of laundry 2 days ago, before all of this had truly escalated. I pulled open the dryer door. It was empty. Not a single sock, not a t-shirt. That was odd. I was sure I'd left them in there. I was getting forgetful in my stress. I headed upstairs to my bedroom to get clothes from the dresser. The door to my room was ajar. I always closed it. My pulse quickened. I pushed it open slowly. The room was a mess. The drawers of my dresser were pulled out, their contents jeans, flannels, t-shirts strewn across the floor. It looked like someone had ransacked the place, searching for something specific. But nothing of value was missing. My grandfather's watch was still on the nightstand. My wallet was on the floor, cash still inside. Then I saw it. Hanging on the hook on the back of my bedroom door was my favorite jacket, a worn, brown leather jacket my grandfather had given me for my 21st birthday. It was the one thing I owned that felt truly like me. And it was gone. The hook was empty. A cold nausea swept over me. This wasn't a random burglary. This was a targeted theft. I ran back downstairs, my fear momentarily eclipsed by a bizarre, possessive anger. What had it taken? I checked the coat rack by the front door. My good winter coat was missing. The old Ohio State ball cap I always wore was gone from its peg. It was taking my clothes. The realization was both horrifying and deeply, personally violating. It wasn't just moving. It was evolving, curating itself. Driven by a morbid, terrifying need to know, I forced myself to go to the front door. I had to see if it was back in the field. I unlocked the deadbolt, my hand trembling, and pulled the door open just a crack. The evening air was cool on my face. I looked out towards the south field, and there it was. Old Jed was back in his original position, right in the center of the field. But he was not the same. The faded overalls and flannel shirt were gone. In their place, he was wearing my missing clothes. My jeans hugged his straw-stuffed legs. My favorite red flannel was buttoned haphazardly over his chest. On his head, perched at a jaunty angle, was my Ohio State ball cap. And draped over his shoulders, flapping slightly in a non-existent breeze, was my brown leather jacket. The sight was so profoundly wrong, so deeply unsettling, that I vomited right there on the welcome mat. It wasn't just wearing my clothes. It was wearing me. It was assembling a skin, an identity, stolen from my own wardrobe. It was erasing the line between us, incorporating pieces of my life into its own grotesque form. The message was clear, and it shattered the last of my resolve. I was being replaced. This thing wasn't just trying to get into my house. It was trying to become me. The sight of the scarecrow wearing my skin broke the last vestiges of my courage. The plan to flee to town evaporated. The thing was no longer just a monster in the field. It was a doppelganger, a mockery of my very existence. The thought of turning my back on it, of letting it stand out there wearing my life, was unbearable. And a darker, more terrifying thought occurred to me. If it could wear my clothes, what was to stop it from wearing my face next? Retreat was no longer an option. This was a siege, and the house was my castle. I had to fortify it. A frantic, desperate energy took hold of me. I moved through the ground floor like a man possessed, locking every window, sliding every deadbolt. The old doors were solid oak, thanks to my grandfather's craftsmanship, but the locks were simple. I needed more. I dragged the heavy oak kitchen table and shoved it against the front door. I piled chairs on top of it for good measure. I moved the living room sofa in front of the back door. I went down to the basement and retrieved my grandfather's old tool chest, bringing up every screw and nail I could find. With a power drill whose battery was dangerously low, I screwed the windows shut, driving long screws through the wooden frames to seal them permanently. The screeching sound of the drill was a symphony of my desperation. Every few minutes, I would stop and run to a window, peering through a crack in the barricades to check on the thing in the field. It hadn't moved from its central position. It just stood there, a statue wearing my clothes, a silent, patient hunter. Its stillness was more menacing than any movement could ever be. It knew I was trapped. It knew the sun was going down. As darkness fell, I worked by the light of a single, battery-powered lantern I'd found in the hall closet. The electricity on the farm was spotty at the best of times, and I had a sickening feeling that it wouldn't last the night. I gathered every candle I could find and placed them around the living room, their small, flickering flames casting dancing, monstrous shadows on the walls. The house, once a place of comfort, now felt like a tomb I was preparing for myself. I sat on the floor in the center of the living room, my back against a wall, the hunting rifle across my knees. The lantern was at my feet, its beam a fragile pool of light in the overwhelming darkness. The house was silent except for the ragged sound of my own breathing and the frantic hammering of my heart. I listened. I listened for the sound of gravel crunching under a straw-stuffed foot. I listened for the creak of the porch steps. I listened for the turn of a doorknob. Hours passed. The candles guttered and died one by one. The battery in the lantern began to dim, the light turning from a bright white to a sickly, weak yellow. The darkness in the corners of the room deepened, becoming solid, tangible. I clutched the rifle tighter, my knuckles white. I was so tired. My body screamed for sleep, but my mind was a frantic animal, caged and terrified. And then, the final betrayal. The lantern flickered once, twice, and then died completely. The darkness that crashed down was absolute. It was a physical weight, smothering and thick. I couldn't see my own hand in front of my face. I was blind. I held my breath, my entire body rigid, listening with an intensity that was painful. At first, there was nothing. Just the hum of blood in my ears. Then, a soft, scraping sound from the front of the house. It was the sound of wood gently grazing against wood. It was the sound of the kitchen table I had barricaded the door with, being slowly, carefully pushed aside. My blood ran cold. It wasn't trying to break in. It was simply moving the obstacles aside, as if they were nothing. There was no crash, no splintering of wood. Just the quiet, methodical sounds of my barricades being dismantled from the other side. I heard the chairs being lifted off the table and set gently on the floor. I heard the heavy table scrape as it was dragged a few feet across the hardwood. I was paralyzed, unable to move, unable to scream. It was inside my defenses, and it had done so with an eerie, polite silence. Then, the final sound. The distinct, metallic click-clack of the front door's deadbolt being turned. The door hinges let out a soft, mournful creak as it swung open. A wave of air washed into the room, carrying a scent that made my stomach heave. It was the smell of wet, rotten earth, of decayed roots and things long buried. And underneath it, unmistakable, was the faint, sharp, citrusy scent of my own cologne, the one I kept on the bathroom shelf. The smell grew stronger. It was in the house. Time stopped. The darkness in the room was no longer just an absence of light. It was a living entity, a viscous fluid I was drowning in. I sat frozen, my back pressed so hard against the wall I felt the drywall might give way. The rifle in my hands was a useless, cold piece of metal. What good was a bullet against something that could move faster than sight, something that was already inside? The front door was open. I could feel the slight change in the air pressure. A cool draft that did nothing to dispel the horrific smell that now permeated the living room, the cloying sweetness of rot mixed with the achingly familiar, sterile scent of my cologne. It was a smell that should never exist in one place, a blasphemous combination of the grave and the bathroom cabinet. I heard it then. A soft, dry, shuffling sound. It was the sound a bundle of straw would make if it were being dragged across a hardwood floor. Thump. Dash thump. It was in the hallway. It had crossed the threshold. My mind, desperate for any scrap of data, tried to paint a picture from the sound. It wasn't walking with a human gait. It was a slow, deliberate, dragging motion, as if it were unfamiliar with the mechanics of legs, or perhaps didn't need them at all. Thump. Closer now. It was at the entrance to the living room. I could hear the individual strands of straw rustling against each other with every movement. I squeezed my eyes shut, a childish, futile attempt to make it all go away. But the darkness behind my eyelids was just as terrifying. I opened them again, staring into the absolute blackness where I knew the archway to the hall stood. The sound stopped. It was in the room with me. I could feel a presence, a shift in the atmosphere, a concentration of that terrible smell. It was standing just inside the doorway. I held my breath, my lungs burning. Maybe if I didn't move, didn't make a sound, it would pass me by. Maybe it was as blind in this darkness as I was. Then, the rustling started again. Thump. It wasn't moving past me. It was moving towards me. It was coming across the living room floor, navigating the furniture I had shoved aside in my panic. Its path straight and unwavering, directly towards the spot where I sat huddled against the wall. It knew exactly where I was. Terror is a curious thing. It can render you completely immobile, a statue of fear. But it can also, when pushed past a certain breaking point, ignite a final, desperate spark of defiance. This was my home. This was where I had eaten meals with my grandfather, where I had read books on rainy afternoons, where I had lived my entire life. I would not die here, cowering in the dark, without even seeing the face of the thing that killed me. With a guttural cry that was part sob, part scream, I fumbled in my pocket. My fingers, numb with fear, closed around the cool metal of my Zippo lighter. I pulled it out, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped it. The dry, shuffling sound stopped. It was close, so close I felt I could reach out and touch the rough canvas of my own jeans it was wearing. I took a final, shuddering breath, the air thick with the smell of it, the gourd-like reek of a rotted pumpkin, the dampness of a long-buried coffin, and cutting through it all, the sharp, cheap, chemical tang of my cologne. It was the scent of my own life being swallowed by the earth. I flipped the lid of the Zippo and spun the flint wheel. The spark flashed, impossibly bright in the absolute blackness. And for a single, horrifying instant, the small, steady flame caught. The light was weak, barely illuminating a 3-foot circle around my hand, but it was enough. It was enough to see the faded, stained burlap of its face, its stitched smile now just inches from my own. It was enough to see the dark, empty pits of its eyes, which held not emptiness, but a deep, ancient, and patient hunger. It was enough to see that it was not standing over me. It was kneeling, its straw-stuffed form crouched down, its face tilted, as if it had been studying me in the dark, its nose almost touching my cheek. The flame reflected in those depthless eyes for a fraction of a second, and then the lighter was knocked from my hand. It clattered to the floor, the flame extinguished, and the darkness rushed back in, thicker and heavier than before. The last thing I saw was its smile. The dry, wrestling sound did not start again. There was no attack, no violent motion, just a gentle, almost intimate pressure as a straw-stuffed hand, wearing the sleeve of my own leather jacket, came to rest softly on my shoulder. And in the suffocating blackness, I can only wait. I can hear its breathing now, a low, rasping sound, like wind through dead cornstalks. It smells of rotten earth and my cologne.